Avengers! Assemble.
Hello, everyone, and welcome back to Excelsior, your hero multiversal podcast. I'm your director, Christian Buckley, back at it once again with the Apex legend, Jack Martin. How are you?
Excelsior, Christian. I'm doing quite well. How you been?
Been well. I moved states, so that's been where we've been. But how are you? It's nice to be talking Marvel again. Specifically Marvel today. We are kind of all heroes are welcome here now, but Marvel's having their moment. Long overdue, it feels like.
Yeah. No, good to be back. Been keeping busy mostly with Star Wars Jedi Survivor, which I just beat last night, and I'm going for the platinum, trying to get it done before Tears of the Kingdom comes out.
Very nice.
We'll see about that.
Yes, you have a matter of hours at this point. But,
yeah, I think I can do it by tomorrow night.
That's
is
fair.
What I'm thinking. I have like some collectible stuff I need to do. It's not like 100% the game, which is good.
Yeah.
But there's a good amount to get for the platinum. So
I mean, I am playing. I did this to myself. I started the game pre-move. I moved, and then I started playing it again after like a week. I'm playing on a higher difficulty than is. Well, no difficulty is really required, but I'm playing above normal, and I think I'm like 20 hours in, maybe around there, and I just started Jeddah, which is Planet 2. So
yeah, Koba can really trap you.
it really can.
Kobo can really trap. Yeah, there's so much to do there, and you can really get lost
Now,
in the wee hours of the game.
Now, before we get into the reason we're sitting down to talk today, which is spoilery and non-spoilery at first, going in depth on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, I want to ask you this, Jack, in relation to Jedi Survivor, because I believe you and I are on the same page when it comes to these two games in relation to this sentiment I'm about to bring up. I look at Jedi Fallen Order very similar to how I look at Marvel's Spider-Man, where the foundation, they nailed it. They nailed what they had to nail, but is kind of safe in some ways. Do you feel that Jedi Survivor was like enough of a step up where you see something like a Spider-Man 2 being able to also step up in some ways that you felt Jedi Survivor may or may not have?
Yeah, I think in terms of the structure of the game, it feels a lot bigger than Jedi Fallen Order, and they added so much more everywhere in that game. Even like the customization, which is profoundly expanded upon in Survivor, and I love that's like one of my favorite parts of the game.
Yeah,
is just finding mustaches in the wild. That's really fun. But just the core mechanics are improved. The skill trees I think are really improved with the different stances and all that. It's a really great leap forward, and yeah, hopefully Spider-Man 2 can follow suit.
Yeah, because we are probably due to see Marvel's Spider-Man 2 fairly soon. There's rumors of a Sony showcase, PlayStation showcase, happening later this month, which of course would most likely feature Spider-Man 2, maybe Wolverine as well, and if that is the case, we will absolutely talk about that. But yeah, they're sort of beginning to kick off the marketing for Spider-Man 2. I don't know if you saw, but Free Comic Book Day was this past weekend. Not the weekend this episode releases, but to celebrate that was the beginning of a new arc of the Gamerverse Marvel world that they have in their comics. I believe the Avengers comics fell under that too, but Spider-Man 2 is getting a prequel comic. First issue's out.
That's right. Have you read that so far?
No, it's free though. Let me download it. I have my iPad right next to me. Let me download that.
Yeah, I need to get on that too. I think that's a really great idea. We saw that with Marvel's Avengers, where it's like entirely optional. You don't have to engage in that, but I thought the Marvel's Avengers comics were cool. There's also a book that I certainly did not read about Marvel's Avengers like taking place in that universe. So any additional things like that, not needed, but very cool.
Yeah, and I remember Marvel's Spider-Man, which came out before Marvel's Avengers, did do a prequel as well. But for that game, they did a prequel novel that I know Kevin Diaz of PlayStation Source and IGN read through. I did not. But in hindsight, it's like, if they did a comic for Spider Man, I would have read it instead of getting a novel.
Yeah, especially since with superheroes, they just lend themselves so nicely to comics. It just makes way more sense to do a small comic run than to do a book.
Yeah. But we are potentially days away, technically, I guess weeks, from seeing more Spider Man 2, Jack. I'm sure you're excited.
Very excited, yes.
So we will cover that as it unfolds. But like I said, the reason we're here today is to discuss Marvel's. I was jokingly saying this to you and my girlfriend. I was like, the last MCU movie. Guardians of the
I mean,
Galaxy.
what a great last MCU movie this would be.
I know. Like, okay, Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. You say it would be a great ending, right? And when I think about it, we're not being spoilery here yet. Thinking of this as the supplement to Endgame instead of Spider-Man Far From Home, right?
Yep.
Wow, what an epilogue that would have been.
I agree.
But
I agree. Far From Home feels, I mean, it's tied into Endgame for sure. I didn't love that movie as much as maybe others did. I think this is even more tied into to Endgame and Infinity War, specifically since the Guardians were kind of like the main characters of those movies, like very surprisingly. So
yeah,
you're right. That it is a good epilogue.
Yeah, I tweeted out my review, and I'll reiterate it here. The best MCU movies, in my opinion, the Guardians trilogy, each individually, Infinity War, which was basically Guardians 2.5, and then Winter Soldier. So I liked the movie. If you couldn't tell, I'm sure you did as well.
Yeah. Yeah, I'm excited to get into it.
Yeah. So spoiler-free thoughts. I guess, what do you want to say about it? Should people see it? If a agent of Excelsior who is a lapsed MCU fan has maybe felt the fatigue that you and I have talked about lately, should they make an effort to go see this in theaters?
Yeah, 100%. I think this is a great theater movie. Coming off of my least favorite MCU project in Ant-Man and the Wasp: Quantumania, I was just fully burned out at that point. This is such a refresh coming back from that. Feels like classic MCU. James Gunn, I love, but he's kind of hit or miss for me, largely in his comedy. And I think this really strikes a great balance between being serious, but also very funny throughout. And it's nothing like beat you over the head comedy, which I think is good in this, and is a really great conclusion to the Guardians trilogy. And it really does feel like a trilogy compared to more so, or compared to other 3-part movie, I suppose, trilogies throughout the MCU. None of them really feel like a beginning, middle, and end as much as this one does. So a really solid number 3 for Guardians here, and yeah, I would totally recommend the theatrical experience, particularly in my experience on a Monday afternoon, if you can swing it. But what about you, Christian?
Yeah, I loved it. The Guardians for the longest time have been my favorite Marvel MCU property. Like Spider-Man, but the Guardians are my favorite movies they've done, and honestly, some of my favorite movies like ever outside the MCU. Guardians 1 and 2 are like both in my top 15 all time, I think. And I think 3 would also be there at this point as well. I've only seen it once, but I really love a good ending. An ending is so important for me in terms of an individual piece of art, but also for a trilogy. I feel like the ending is the most important element of it. And on both fronts, as this conclusion to this movie series I already loved, in conclusion to the story they tell within this movie, I really think they nailed it, and I really do not have any complaints personally. Um, but yeah, I think it's worth seeing. Absolutely. I'll say no spoiler specifics here. Huge caveat to all of this. This movie's kind of fucked up. Like it is dealing with a lot of heavy subject matter that if you are easily disturbed, if animal cruelty is something that really affects you, I would honestly not recommend you go see this movie because it can be like on a grand scheme of all cinema, it's not like the most extreme you can get with it, but like the way they characterize a lot of these creatures being anthropomorphic, like you have an attachment to them on top of being animals as characters, and then there's some really messed up stuff that happens that is hard to watch. So I'll throw that out there as a little asterisk to how strong a movie this is. But yeah.
Yeah, that's a good point. I've heard a lot of people say they probably are never going to see it again, and largely comes down to that. Not that they're saying it's a bad movie. It's just nothing they can really see again, out of preference for not wanting to see those visuals. So that's a good point.
Yeah. So any other final thoughts before we open the floodgates for spoilers?
No, non-spoiler stuff. Great movie. You should see it.
Sweet.
Do you have a ranking before so we can prepare for the end, which I'm sure we'll get into?
For the trilogy or like in the MCU?
I guess both.
In the MCU, it's high. It's probably top 5 with the other two.
Cool.
For me. In terms of the actual how it shakes out, that's such a difficult question because like I love 2. 1 is so goddamn good, but 3 just like hits way harder. So like my gut instinct is 2, 3, 1 at the moment because I have to see 3 again. But then I'm like, that feels so cruel to 1, but they're all like amazing to me. So I really don't know how to accurately rank them. But what about you?
I like this one a lot. It's currently sitting in my number 10 spot in the MCU as a
Solid.
whole. It is under Guardians 1, which is in my number 8 spot. And so obviously it's above Guardians 2. I like Guardians 2 a lot. I don't like it as much as you do or some other people do, but I don't dislike it as much as some other people do. So it's kind of like in the middle of my MCU rankings, but I do enjoy the movie.
Yeah, I personally I could see this replace Guardians 2 for me. Where I think 2 is just great because of what it does for the characters more than anything else. And I think this one is such a stronger use of the characters across the board that's the most important thing to me when I go to an MCU movie is like how is this serving the characters more than really anything else. So for those reasons, I do see it eventually maybe replacing 2, because 2 is a lot lighter. The one thing I hate about 2 is the Taserface bit. I feel like it gets overplayed to hell.
That's like peak James Gunn comedy. Like if you don't like that, you're probably not gonna like a lot of James Gunn stuff. And I don't like it, but it's just kind of emblematic of the stuff he often does in his movies.
Yeah, like I think it's funny for a bit, and then they keep going with it.
Yeah,
But it makes his death satisfying. 3 though, I don't think there's any of that there, and I think that's for the better. So again, with time, I think I could see 3 becoming my favorite of the bunch. But going back to the content warning as we open the spoiler floodgates in 3, 2, 1. How fucking sick was the high evolutionary death though?
yeah, that was
his
great.
fucking face ripped off.
I didn't anticipate, and I was wondering why he had the mask the whole time, or like what was up with his face.
Yeah.
And I didn't like put it together that Rocket had done that. And I figured it was like some upgrades or whatever he was doing on himself, and not that Rocket just like went ham at some point when he was escaping and did that. So just seeing that and seeing all the Guardians involved in it, solely doing it for their friend, was fantastic. And Gamora being the final blow.
Yeah, very very big fan of that. So as a whole, I guess, where does your mind go to immediately? Is it the like way it responds to Endgame with the Gamora plot? Is it about Rocket? Where do you want to start?
Um, I would say overall just being a great end cap to everyone's stories and putting them in a place at the end of the movie where it feels like if we want to revisit them, fine, but it doesn't feel necessary. Um, like I guess I really liked how they ended with Star Lord, even though it says in the end credit that he'll return, which is fine. Um, that was something that I always wondered is like, does he have any interest in returning to Earth? And I'm really glad that they decided to do that. And it, at a point, kind of felt like a little rushed. Like he never really mentioned his grandfather in any of the other movies, but I kind of went along with it because it made sense to me. Like him pulling out the photo was kind of like a Cat Peggy situation, in a sense, even though this wasn't hit as much as that relationship was. But yeah, just that really worked for me. Like that whole ending scene with Florence and the Machine's "Dog Days Are Over." Like, man, you could
Yeah,
not have picked a better song for that.
yeah, that because when I saw that on the soundtrack list ahead of the movie like releasing, I was like, oh god, gonna be such a sad scene. They're gonna like do some like slowed down version of that. It's gonna be like when Rocket's dying, and it was like
Mm.
somehow the peppier version of that song was sadder than what I imagined, but in like a happy sad way, you know. Um, and I agree with you. I think it was very strong to see all these characters reach a natural point that closes off their arc in a satisfying way that spanned a trilogy and a couple Avengers movies. Um, I'm also glad nobody died.
Yeah,
I really expected that going into this for contract reasons and the stakes and tone of the marketing with this one. I was thinking that the only people that were going to walk away were like Star Lord and Groot, because Chris Pratt is a box office name and Groot is just cheap. You know, it's Vin Diesel saying one word,
yeah.
three words. Um,
It that was really like kind of the obvious play is to
yeah.
have someone die, and I'm so glad they didn't. I really agree with you. I
Mhm.
think for this team, you kind of want them to all have happy endings, and they do. It's kind of perfect at the end. And I did not expect this movie to like get me emotional, but I was like a puddle in that final scene. Like
Oh yeah,
completely lost it. Really perfect ending for everyone.
yeah. I think I cried at least three times, maybe four. The first one was when I thought they were Lokiing in Infinity War Rocket. I was like, oh, he's toast
Mm.
immediately. Fuck, this movie's gonna be brutal. But yeah. What did you think of that? Just like ratcheting it up pretty quick. Like we get an intro with Star Lord down in the dumps about Gamora being the drunk that Tony Stark was never allowed to be, and
True. Yeah,
then
I
all hell
think
breaking loose.
yeah, it's a good start to the movie. I think it's a really great song choice too,
Hmm.
and I think I gotta be honest. I feel like the music is probably the best here. Not like music choice, but the way they use the music.
Hmm.
Uh, I feel like it was a really good start here and good tone setting as well. This is like the saddest opening to any
Oh yeah,
Guardians movie for sure.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. And it's interesting when you bring up the music, right? Because outside of the intro, Beastie Boys, and the ending, none of the music sequences really stuck with me in my memory of the film the way that immediately so many did from one and two. And I think that's because of what you're saying of the approach they took here with having the music be more tone setting than just like allowing the action to be the spotlight, right? Where we get like come a little bit closer in Guardians 2, which is just this like be like gigantic, gorgeous slow-mo chaos of Yondu using the arrow through the Ravager ship, right? Like that is the soundtrack to that moment. But here, the soundtrack is like you're saying, being much more of a tone setter, and it's a little more reserved, but it didn't stand out as much to me as being memorable the way it has for the others in the trilogy. But
Yeah.
those
I,
three
I think
moments really stand out for sure. The three big ones I mentioned.
Yeah, I do think it's those three in particular. I think you're right on that. But they stand out very strongly, I think. Especially, I got to say, that scene, the Beastie Boys scene in the
Oh
hallway,
fuck yeah, dude! Oh my god.
best hallway scene, man, in the MCU. They did it. That
Yeah,
was spectacular. I think that's like one of my all time favorite action scenes in the MCU.
I think I'm trying to think of what could rival it. I mean, the fly through in the Battle of New York is incredible, right? Of just like seeing everybody like following Iron Man, the tracking shot, go over to Hulk, like all that stuff is really cool. But I think you're right. Like just again, as an ending, it feels so much more personal. It is a spectacle, but it's not just like look at how much shit we're throwing at the screen right now. It's like no, everybody got their moment in that scene. And I also unironically think No Sleep Till Brooklyn fucking goes hard. I love that song when it's used in movies well. And it worked here for me.
Yeah, no, totally did. The one shot throughout as well, like just really perfect. I think that was an excellent song choice, definitely.
Yeah, and just like allowing that to go on as long as it did, letting that scene breathe, and like the song starting in the room before, like when they're actually like being like, all right, this is it. It all flowed very, very well. From like inciting that sequence to the action, which surprised me because I saw James Gunn in an interview say that that sequence, the hallway sequence, that was a 5 day shoot, and they were
Wow.
able to make that thing flow so well. So I was very impressed.
Yeah, no, it was awesome.
Another thing I appreciate, like you said, with the humor being a bit more toned down, is that it kind of avoids the the MCU TikTok criticism that like bled over to the internet the last 8 months maybe of like, oh, he's right behind me, isn't he? Or just like, well, that just happened, right?
So so did they take that out of the trailer? What Rocket was saying?
I think so,
Or
yeah.
they take that? They must have taken that out of the movie, unless I didn't catch it.
I don't think it was in there, but the thing that stands out to me is that like I really thought there was going to be a moment specifically, and I'm curious if you know what I'm going to talk about, where a very suspenseful moment was going to just be like a and character's dead, ha ha ha, that was surprising but kind of sad, right? Where Drax, Mantis, and Nebula are in the pit with the not Rathtars, that's Star Wars, uh, the whatever those things are from Guardians 2, the intro.
Dude, I totally thought of the Rathtars as well.
Yeah. um, and Mantis is like approaching one because they're all gonna like kill her or kill the crew, and she has like faith in it and like with her powers and her connection to like living things, it's like okay, she's gonna try and calm it, and I was like, it's gonna swallow her,
Yep,
it's gonna bite her,
my
or
thoughts exactly.
this is either where she dies and that's going to be sad, or she's going to get eaten and then Drax is going to cut her out like he did in 2, and it's going to be a haha, she's covered in goop. And it was like, no, it was like a strong final action moment for her. So,
No, I agree. I'm so glad that, and I was really surprised that it was not as jokey as the other Guardians movies were. And I know it makes sense because this is a much more serious movie. Um, but you'd think with Guardians too, like that's very serious about Peter like finding his dad and all that, and it's very funny and comedic. and this much less so. But I'm glad. I'm really glad they went with the tone they did for this.
Yeah, and that's not to say that this movie isn't funny, because there were moments where I laughed like hard.
Yeah. First,
Specifically, oh, go ahead.
I was gonna say first f bomb in the MCU.
Yeah, that I unfortunately I had that spoiled for me on social media. Like, well, but I think they released it as a promo where like fucking was bleeped out, and I was like, okay, well, that kind of ruins it. But okay,
Yeah.
it was still funny. It still played well with my audience. Specifically though, I have to shout out Will Poulter as Adam Warlock. He fucking killed it, dude. He was so funny.
He was funny. I didn't love his character all that much, but he got some good lines here and there.
I died when he was like charging at Gamora, screaming, and then she's like, "One more step and I'll kill the dog thing," and he's like, "Don't be rash." Like,
Yeah.
that delivery was incredible. That was so good.
Yeah. He had almost nothing to contribute in this movie, I thought.
Yeah.
Like kind of felt like an afterthought. But no, I agree. His delivery at least was very funny, like very naive despite being this really powerful individual.
Yeah, and it did sort of play against expectations in a way, right? Because I feel like due to the comics and due to the years of setup, people were expecting Adam Warlock to be like the villain of this movie. And he was the one who incited the conflict. But I do think that because of I forget their names, the gold people being such jokes of villains in two, on top of that, it's like, yeah, that kind of makes sense that he would also just be kind of a nothing guy who thinks he's better than he is. And he's also premature in terms of his development. So, like, I thought the justification and execution of him was good, but I understand why people who were expecting him to be God Killer Adam Warlock were disappointed.
Yeah, he just felt like another element to this movie that I didn't find necessarily needed.
Yeah.
But he was fine. And for him to be a member of the Guardians at the end, that's kind of probably where they needed him to go. So
That's the other
they got him
thing.
there.
Yeah, I imagine he was mostly set up for the future.
Yeah. And the thing that is so emblematic of him being unnecessary is the Star-Lord sequence at the very end of him coming to save Star-Lord because everyone deserves a second chance. Like that whole sequence just didn't need to happen, but it seems like they wanted to have a resolution for his character as well, so that was like I guess his redemption. I also thought, oh, Peter's dead because his head just fucking exploded. Like
I did
that
too.
seemed unnecessary too.
I did too. That's another moment where I was crying because, listen, I'm not talking about any Chris Pratt discourse here, but Star Lord is, again, similar to the movies, like my favorite MCU character up there with Cap and Spidey, right? So, like, that got me too because I was like, damn, they all got away and he just missed out because he needed that fucking music. But I really thought they were doing it there. Again, happy with where he ended up, but that was also a big swerve. I was like, oh, damn, he's dying a dying death. Like that's brutal.
Yeah, I'm curious why they did that. Like,
Do,
you
do
didn't
you want
need to do that.
do you want to know my theory? I guess
What's that?
James Gunn was sick of the fucking shit where people were like, he was in space floating there with Gamora so long and he was fine. When in reality, his skin would have started to like burst because of the low pressure in the first movie, where he was like, here, are you happy it's accurate? But it's still a fantasy movie, so I'm going to let him live.
Yeah. That makes sense.
Because I don't know if you've seen any of the other interviews he's been given lately, now that he's like fully free from his Marvel duties. He's been saying some things.
Oh yeah, like what?
He was like, he did like an interview run with him and Chris Pratt, and the two of them were just like riffing a lot. But somebody asked him about the Infinity Stones, and he was like, "Yeah, they told me I had to use the Power Stone in Guardians of the Galaxy, and I made up some bullshit about the lore in like an hour and a half, and that's what they ended up doing all of. And then Chris Pratt was like, "Wow, so like everything that Infinity War and all of like the Avengers stuff is based on, you just like threw at a wall." And he was like, "Kinda, yeah."
That's pretty impressive.
Yeah, it really is.
It works though. Like it's all junk anyways, but like, if it makes sense to the audience, that's
Yeah,
what matters.
yeah. So, um, yeah, it's been very interesting seeing a lot of that stuff and hearing about like what he thought of what happened with Gamora, because I guess his original plan was to have Gamora die instead of Yondu in
Oh,
two.
really?
Yeah, so he was like, and I'm paraphrasing most of these things. If you're curious, look him up. But he said something to the effect of like, originally he wanted Gamora to be the one who sacrificed at the end of Guardians 2, but it didn't make sense for the themes of the film, and it kind of fell out of left field. So when the Russos were like, we want to kill Gamora in Infinity War, he was cool with that. But some of the choices that were made, I guess, with Infinity War, he didn't agree with. Like, he thought Star-Lord would have not hesitated to kill Gamora when she asked him. He thought that he wouldn't have punched Thanos in that sequence, and, doomed everything.
Yeah. Which they
And
joke about in this movie.
yeah, they do. But yeah, seeing what he was able to do with Gamora post Endgame Infinity War, I also thought was a very surprisingly mature approach to that character. I'm glad they didn't regress back to what was and just commented on how like people can change, and
Yeah.
you just got to stop at a point. Like, that was a surprising thing to see an MCU movie address.
No, I agree. It was a very unique ending for a relationship, which it either ends in a breakup or, happily ever after. And this is like somewhere in between, which I really appreciated. I thought that was very unique, that like it's kind of impossible to do in other movies just because we're dealing with like multiverses here. But I thought the way those two characters separate it was really fascinating. And you're right, mature, very mature at the end of the day.
Yeah, and it's for a relationship also that is like so beloved by the fans. Like, I feel like everybody loves Star-Lord and Gamora in all the back and forths they've had, but like withholding that because it serves the story and the characters better. I think, glad he did that. Glad that was his vision for it. And I've seen some people talking also about, this movie is post James Gunn and Marvel breakup, and I'm wondering if that's at all reflected in that dynamic. Or I've also seen people saying like, was Disney aware of what they let James Gunn do in this movie? Which, like, of course they were, but I also wonder if Kevin Feige just fought for him to be able to do whatever he wanted with this one as a make good, I'm sorry sort of thing.
Right. Yeah, that's a good call.
Specifically with like the High Evolutionary being sort of a stand-in for corporate art, and I was getting vibes of what's going on with the news lately of like AI replacing artists, and the High Evolutionary being like, oh, eventually like I can make it better because I have the vision for it, and you don't need people to like have free thought. And then that's why he was so upset about Rocket and all that stuff.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'm curious how you felt about his motivation, his obsession with Rocket, and that was kind of the core of the movie, was Rocket and his past and relationship with the High Evolutionary.
Yeah. I think as a villain, he was mostly good. He honestly reminded me of a Batman villain. And I'm trying to remember like the specific. It seems like there's a Batman villain that is like almost exactly the same as him. And I can't quite remember.
Was it Raish?
No, I'm thinking like of like a C-list Batman character who like dissects people and like tries to make them better. Maybe it's an Invincible villain I'm thinking of. But
Yeah.
either in any case, I thought he was in terms of MCU villains, he was relatively good. That's kind of the issue with the MCU is a lot of the villains aren't fantastic, but I thought he was pretty solid.
In the context of the Guardians trilogy, how did the villains shake out for you?
Ooh, I think
Don't count
my
Thanos.
number
Don't count Thanos. He was only in
no.
the thing for like a second.
I think my number one would be Ego,
Hell yeah.
just of how personal that is to Peter. And then I guess the High Evolutionary would be number two. Again, I like those two of just how personal they are to Peter and Rocket.
Yep.
And then I'm forgetting the name.
Ronan the Accuser.
Yeah, Ronan the Accuser. He's the villain he needs to be in the
Sure, yeah.
1980s movie that is the Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 1. So he's not bad. He's just a whatever villain. You didn't need a good villain for that movie. So he serves his purpose.
That's a good point. Also, like Yondu's kind of an antagonist in that one, and he's so
Sure.
charismatic that he makes up for it. So like, it's okay.
What about you?
Same, exact same ranking. Ego, I think, is the strongest, and then High Evolutionary. I don't think he's a really good villain. I think he's like upper third, upper quarter of MCU villains. Like he doesn't reach Thanos, Killmonger tier, but like I'd say he's close up to like Vulture for me.
Sure. Great performance, too.
Oh yeah, absolutely. What did you think of Rocket's backstory with Floor, Teefs, and Lila?
Very sad.
Very, very, very sad.
I was I feel like it paid off so well with the raccoon finding out he was a raccoon from North America at the very end. Like that's something I didn't expect to learn or for him to learn from Volume 1 all the way to now. And for us as audience members to learn that story kind of like in a roundabout way through the Guardians, like learning through the past, like accessing the holodata essentially. I thought that was really smart, and it fleshes his character out a lot more. Like you always knew that there was trauma related to his backstory, but to be able to see it certainly allows us to humanize him a lot more. And painful to see, but good to learn.
I wonder, hearing you say that, I'm thinking what you said about this being such a strong trilogy compared to other trilogies in the MCU. I wonder if the reason that this Guardians trilogy was able to feel so cohesive, outside of James Gunn being the reason it exists, on like a writing front, tonally, like execution. I wonder if it's because the Guardians of the Galaxy, yes, Star-Lord is like the lead, but more so than any of the other Marvel projects that have gotten trilogies, including Avengers stuff, it is a like concentrated group of characters that you see the seeds of their struggles and growth and arcs from Volume 1. And it's just the rate at which those characters got put into the spotlight was paced out well enough where Volume 2 was kind of Star-Lord's movie, and we got a bit more Rocket, and Gamora and Nebula got a lot of room to grow, and you got to like peel back a little more with Drax. But with this movie specifically, I felt, at least compared to Star-Lord, did take a slight step back for the sake of the other characters to really follow through on all those like throwaway lines and moments that the actors brought to the characters like subtly in 1 and 2, where it feels more cohesive than when you get 3 different Thor directors, and you get, even amongst Avengers, 2 different groups of people doing the Avengers movies with the Joss crew and then the Russos. But like Guardians never had to deal with one specific character for a trilogy, like they were able to pick and choose who gets to grow when, and everybody else got small moments to stretch out.
Yeah, it's really special compared to the other trilogies or series within the MCU, where like Thor is not a cohesive series. I don't think it changes tone halfway through. Even Spider-Man, I think that's a solid 3 series of movies, but it doesn't scream trilogy to me. Um, can like I feel like he's gonna come back soon, so who knows? Right now, I think it's fairly solid, but doesn't stand alone. Where I think the Guardians has always been really good at standing alone, even though this is like directly tied into the events of Infinity War and Endgame, because kind of everything at this point, it's still contained within its own logic. And I was surprised at the amount of things that are completed, like in terms of the arcs from Guardians 1, like specifically with Drax.
Oh yeah.
Him sort of returning to being that fatherly figure that we didn't quite see in Guardians 1, like just felt full circle to me and was really great to see. Yeah.
I also was very happy to see him like solo Adam Warlock
Yeah.
in like the bazaar at the beginning, because like I am with Dave Bautista in his disappointment that he's like, hey, I signed on to this character being like, this guy kills Thanos. And he got like half a second to talk to Thanos and got, turned into tofu on the collector stage. But I'm glad he was able to basically fight a child god, but still kind of a god, and more than hold his own there, in addition to having that moment as a character to sort of touch back to his trauma of his children, his family. But I also really enjoyed Nebula in this movie a lot for the same reasons of seeing how far she's grown. Very subtly, her sort of drive to help Rocket, when you think back to the fact that they were the two sole surviving Guardians in the Endgame blip era.
Right.
Again, not like a huge focus of this movie, putting a spotlight on her investment in this, the way that it's like not heavy handed, but like worn on their sleeve the way it is for Quill. But her dealing with it in a Nebula way, and sort of that scene where she learns that Rocket lived, and Mantis like sees how affected she was by it. Like pretty much everybody in the core cast really got their moment, and I'm so happy they were able to do that.
No, I totally agree. It seems like a really difficult balancing act, but they nail it quite well across the whole trilogy, even introducing more characters like Mantis now. And yeah, no, it's great.
Groot also solid in this one. I liked him here. I guess the whipping out all the guns was a nice moment. That was fun.
Yes, yeah, that was a really great sequence. That paid off. Like they didn't check him at the security gate. That was cool. Did you like the "I love you guys" moment at the end?
I did. I really loved that.
Yeah.
That was fun. Because
I did too.
I saw James Gunn had to clarify that, and I was like, man, I feel like it was like well conveyed, because 2 minutes before that happened, we see Gamora finally understand him. It's like, oh, see, in time you learn what Groot means, and then the audience gets to hear it. It's like, oh, that's so nice.
Yeah, I love the idea that it's not like a linguistic thing. It's straight up just you have to be around these creatures for long enough to get it.
Yeah.
I think that's awesome. And yeah, I agree. I think that's a really, really solid idea for them to do that at the end of this trilogy.
Yeah, that was very, very touching. And something I think only Guardians of the Galaxy could do,
Yeah.
which is so strange to think about, because I've seen people sharing around that concept art from like Comic-Con 2012, 2013.
That's the thing. Like, I remember when this movie was announced, and I was like, all right, they've gone too far. They have gone too far. I've never heard of this group, and that's a tree and a raccoon. And now we're here, and it's like, wow, this is like these three movies are some of the best MCU movies. By far the best trilogy in the MCU has to offer. And some of the best characters and just style in the MCU. It really takes the template that you kind of have to run with these types of movies and adds so much flair and charm to it that you don't even notice that it's a Marvel movie by the end of it. It's just a really solid movie.
Yeah, and I'm with you in 2014 when I saw it, and then I was like, wow, that was incredible. Like, what Guardians 1 was like a huge moment for many people, myself included, but like it felt like when I saw that movie, I got a glimpse of a feeling of what it would have been like for somebody to see Star Wars in 77, of just
Yep.
like this feels so incredibly fresh, and like it's not snobby, but it's still like irreverent, and like it's snobby in like a, I don't know, like a Tumblr, famous like Tumblr things of like pop culture stuff that like people like are like, oh, this is so quirky, like that kind of vibe,
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
It's not that, but it is still very fresh and funny and random in ways, but it's not like, aren't we random? It's like, no, it's very earnest and there's so much heart to it, the way there is with Star Wars, and it is visually so creative for the MCU at the time in 2014, so distinct. And I, leaving that theater, I was like, keep this separate from the Avengers, please. Like, this is so worth protecting, right? But now, in hindsight, I'm with you. Yeah, like I think it is a achievement within the MCU, and for me personally, it's probably my favorite trilogy of the last 10 years in movies.
You think it's up there with Austin Powers?
Now it wasn't 10 years. That's all time.
True.
Um, but yeah, I think in terms of like poppy blockbuster stuff, easily. Yeah, like I'm just so happy that it was able to get finished. It finished so strong, and it feels like a nice closing of a chapter. It feels like a lot of resolution and closure for many things, including Marvel fatigue for some people. But how do
Yeah.
how do you feel on that front about the future of the MCU post this movie? Because I've seen a lot of people saying like, "Oh, Marvel's saved, MCU's back, baby." That kind of
Oh, I
sentiment. Where are you at with this?
I don't feel that at all. I do not feel that. I feel like this is just like we've been talking about, so distinct from the greater MCU that this does not move the barometer one way or another for me. For feeling more positive. This is more so an isolated incident of James coming back and doing his thing and getting some really great closure for these characters. There are still like projects I'm excited for, but I'm not particularly thinking this movie saved the MCU. I'm excited for Loki. I really like that first season, and I mean June's right around the corner. That'll be cool. And the Marvels. I really like that trailer at the beginning of the movie. I don't think we have talked about it on that show, but
I don't think we
that
did
was
that.
that was a solid trailer.
Yeah, I am very much looking forward to that. I loved Ms. Marvel. Like that was one of my favorite projects. Like I forget everything that came out last year if I'm being completely honest right now, but maybe it was my favorite project. Oh, that and Multiverse of my highlights last year.
Yep. Hmm.
I love Kamal Khan, so I loved the vibe of that trailer. I really love Brie Larson, so I'm excited to see her in an ensemble here. Because I think in you know an ensemble like Scott Pilgrim, she isn't obviously having as much to do as she is here with Carol, but like I love her in that. So, and I liked Monica in WandaVision a lot. So very excited for that movie when that hits. But yeah, I think the whole thing with the state of the MCU currently is that they've had a couple that didn't quite hit. I still have yet to see Quantumania, but like Love and Thunder last year. We don't have to talk about that right now, but like man, what a stark comparison between that and Guardians 3. But
Yeah. Did you like that movie? I kind of forget.
I thought it was fine. I
Yeah.
thought people were a bit too harsh on it. Like it was more Taika than Ragnarok was in terms of just like not even more Taika, but like it was more self-indulgent with its style. But I didn't think that it was worth like saying like, oh wow, this is one of the worst movies I've ever seen. I was like, hey, if you gave me the choice between this and Dark World, I'd rather watch this.
I don't know if I feel the same way.
That's fair
I gotta
enough.
think about that, but
Yeah.
it was just like really exhausting to watch that movie. Um, like talk about beating you over the head with comedy.
Yeah.
That movie does that all the time, and most of it doesn't work for me.
Sure. I think from memory, because again, I haven't seen it in a year, but I kind of feel the same way about Ragnarok. I just thought the jokes were funnier in Ragnarok.
Yeah, no, it's certainly the same quantity. It's just what works and what doesn't. And I think
Yeah.
Ragnarok, I think, tells a more compelling story as well, so that helps a lot, and is genuinely funnier.
Yeah. Like Ragnarok, I think has like this that same sort of problem as Guardians 2, if you think of it as a problem, where like they really go in on that like the same couple jokes. Like they keep like hitting those jokes. And it's like, isn't this funny? Isn't this the same joke funny? And it just like happens that there it's like it is funny, you know? Where
I actually have both of them on. They're both like right next to each other in my rankings. Ragnarok
yeah.
and Volume 2. They're both like very similar to me.
Yeah, and I think Love and Thunder does the same thing. It's just like I said, like like there's not as many of those jokes hit, but it's the same style, you know.
Yeah.
But the only difference is there's nothing to cut through that in Love and Thunder, where there is in Ragnarok. It just isn't that like it's not good. Like the hella stuff cuts through, but is it good? You know, like there's no cleanser like that in Love and Thunder.
Sure.
But that, besides the fact, I think the issue, or not even issue, but like the state of the MCU, there's just so much all the time that if something is weak in some aspect, it's like, why would I do this? If it's a show that's weak, it's like, that's an 8-hour investment. If it's a movie that's weak, it's like, that is a trip to the theater and at least $25, you know?
Yeah, it's just, and I think they've said as much. They just really need to cut down on the quantity of projects that they're releasing.
Yep.
Because you get to a certain point, if you're gonna release so many, a lot of them aren't gonna be good. Just by the fact of releasing so many and being stretched so thin. Yeah, it's a lot. I feel like it was so perfect, the Infinity Saga. Like, part of me wishes they just wrapped it up then. Like, what a great send-off Endgame would have been. There's still, I'm sure there's still going to be some great stuff, and we've seen some great stuff in Phase 4. It just feels like a lot right now.
Yeah. Like, we've said it multiple times, but, like, if we could get 2 movies and, like, 2 8-episode shows a year, sweet spot, I think.
Yeah, that's perfect.
If you want to do a couple of shorter shows, like, I feel like we've seen shorter shows can suffer from episode limitations, but, like, I don't know. There's a balance, and they have to be aware of that as much as they want to keep throwing stuff out there to appeal to a bunch of different audiences. Like, that's good, but also be mindful of the rate at which they come out, because then you run into the Marvel comic problem in comics in general, where it's like, I cannot tell you, because I don't know, how many runs are going at Marvel right now for comics. But whatever the number is, I'm overwhelmed by it. And
Oh, yeah.
comic fans, not expected to keep up with everything. If the MCU wants to reflect how many characters they tell stories with, we've talked about this several times already. Like, there will reach a point where it's like you're not expected to keep up with everything. And with stuff like Marvel Legends, whatever that recap thing is, I think they're aware of that, right?
For sure. And that's sad to me because I wish everything felt like it was a must-watch.
Yeah.
And that's difficult when you're doing so much.
Yeah, because even something like Guardians 3, I think is a must watch, but it doesn't feel like it's a must watch because you'll only understand what's happening in the Marvels if you watch Guardians 3. It's like, no, it's a must watch because it's really goddamn good, you know?
Yep.
And then, I don't know, Adam Warlock might show up in Secret Invasion or something. I don't know, right? You know, like it's leaning back into what the Infinity Saga was like, where it's like, yeah, even there, not everything was you have to see Iron Man 2 to understand the Avengers, which like I think you kind of maybe had to, so it's a bad example. But you know, like I think people also have a misskewed look at how connected everything was, you know, of like how necessary everything was to understand everything in the multi or the Infinity Saga. But
Yeah, it's like I suppose you didn't have to watch everything, and I feel like they did an especially good job tying things together in Infinity War.
agree.
Like Guardians feels so separate from that, but their introduction, that like 30-second introduction, you kind of know everything you need to know.
Yeah, and I think they're a good example of like being invested in those characters helps a lot with Infinity War, but if you're somebody who never messed with them because you're like, I don't care about the raccoon, and you see them in Infinity War, I think you can still enjoy Infinity War, right? Like that's I don't think you need to know all that stuff, but yeah, it's them finding the right balance, tipping the scales, whatever way they got to go. Like you said, there's still stuff that's coming out that is probably going to be great. Like we're both excited for the Marvels, Loki. I'm very curious to see how Secret Invasion goes next month.
Oh right, I forgot about that.
Yeah.
So that's next month. When's Loki?
So I don't know if things are changing because I don't know if they finished production on Loki, like post production. I don't know if there was any stuff that would be affected by the writer's strike, but I think the last rumor that was kicking around was like August or September, I want to say.
Right. I don't know why I thought that was next month. Maybe it's because Loki was around this time a couple
Loki
years ago.
was May or June, yeah.
Yeah.
But
Yeah, Secret Invasion. That'll be good. Hopefully. I mean, it looks really interesting.
yeah, and I think that can also be something similar to something like a Winter Soldier in a Phase 2, where it's like, hey, there's important stuff in here, but it's also really good, you know? Like, if they're able to hit the tone they're teeing up with the trailers, and, you know, Samuel L. Jackson is always great to watch in these. Hoping, you know, but I wouldn't say I agree with you. I wouldn't say Guardians 3 changes my excitement, investment, or expectations about the MC moving forward.
It actually makes me more excited about DC, to be quite honest with you.
Hell yeah, I'm glad you brought it up. 'Cause-
Just the fact that James Gunn really seems like he knows what he's doing. To be able to get this trilogy done after everything that happened, for him to sign on with DC and get that ship right in the right direction, like I actually have extremely more confidence in DC now. Maybe not
Yeah.
necessarily because of this movie, but it's certainly a part of it.
Well, allow me to throw in something that might bolster that because of this movie, right? Suicide Squad, the James Gunn one. You and I both thought it was solid, right?
Yeah.
Not losing our minds over it the way that some people were, but
Two James Gunn for me, actually.
that's where I'm going with this. I think Suicide Squad is this thing where you have James Gunn playing in a world with a lot of rules because it takes place in the DCEU, but what he's able to bring to it in terms of the writing style, the banter between the characters was, I thought, the biggest strength of it. It was just very, you know, unhinged, reveling in the gross humor, shock kills, stuff like that. But um, I think a lot of that is because of what the tone of the DCEU was prior to that, where that was the tone of the DCEU. It was like, we're so dark, we're so violent, you know? And Guardians 3, similar to what we were talking about before of like finding the right tone, feels very different from Guardians 2, feels very different from Suicide Squad because he knows the right tone to bring to that. Where something like Superman, which I've seen some people concerned that James Gunn is doing Superman, I think this movie and the tone he was able to go for and execute on has me very confident in Superman because he, at least in how he's talking about it, is like very aware of the type of character that Superman is. Like Superman is not Peacemaker, he's not Drax, he's not Star-Lord. He's Superman, and he should be treated as such. And the story and writing and everything involved with that should reflect that. So, seeing the range James Gunn's been able to do across those three movies, Guardians 2, 3, and Suicide Squad, gives me confidence that whatever, thing he has to aim for tone-wise, whatever constraints he has, which at this point should be none, of like how it should fit into everything, like what happened with Suicide Squad, aren't there. So whatever he feels is reflective of Superman, authentic to Superman, he can do, and I think he can probably hit, personally.
Yeah, no, I wholeheartedly agree.
But yeah, very enthusiastic about DC after 2023 because of this movie.
Do we know when the first? That's a tough question. I was gonna say, when's the first DC project? There's like 1,000 DC things coming out soon, but I don't know what the first.
Let me crack open my flow chart, Jack. We can see. So
Flash is next month.
Yeah, depending on how it's received, it's Flash.
Okay.
If that fails, depending on how Blue Beetle is received, it's Blue Beetle.
Oh God.
Aquaman is both, I think. I don't know.
Flash seems like the smart, like, hey, we're opening the multiverse now, and like maybe this is the door to the new DC universe.
Yeah.
I don't know. I'm very excited for that movie, surprisingly.
Yeah, that trailer played before too. I was like, oof.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
And from all accounts, and it typically previews are always really high for every movie.
Yeah.
But they're like through the roof high. People are saying like this is the greatest superhero movie ever made. I don't think it will be like that, but I'm sure it's going to be pretty great.
Do you want to know what's given me an ungodly amount of faith in this one, Jack?
What's that?
Tom Cruise specifically requested to be shown this movie and loved it.
Wow, fuck yeah.
I know this man did The Mummy, but like brush that aside. Outside of The Mummy and outside of his personal life, this man knows his shit when it comes to movies.
He does. He knows what makes a good blockbuster.
Yeah, and I forget what he said specifically, but like he was impressed with it. So
yeah, this another barometer. I'm really excited to see Hideo Kojima's Instagram post about this, because if he talks about a movie like for a while on his Instagram, that he likes it. But if he's like, "Oh, I just saw the latest Transformers movie," like that's all he says about it. No opinion. The no opinion is like he hated that shit. But if he talks about it for a few sentences, he's like, wow, this man loved that.
Is this,
that profoundly touched him.
Is this fresh in your mind? Because I think earlier today or earlier this week, he was like, just saw the Mario movie.
Did he give a no response to the Mario movie?
I think he posted his 4 pictures and he said, just saw the Super Mario Brothers movie. And then he put in a mushroom emoji.
Okay.
So that's something.
That is something. That could go a few ways. Maybe he was high on mushrooms when he saw it.
Maybe. What's also funny is, that whole thing. I think it's like a Phineas and Ferb sound clip where it's like, if I had a nickel for every time this specific thing happened, I'd have two nickels, which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it happened twice. Um, Two movies this year, starring Chris Pratt, came out in the spring. Both had action sequences set to No Sleep Till Brooklyn.
Oh, right. I did hear people talking about that because
For Mario,
I
yeah.
still haven't seen the Mario movie, but I did hear people talk about that.
Yeah.
Did you like that movie?
I did. It was
Good.
it was incredibly safe. It is the most Nintendo official approved version of a Mario movie, but like I liked it.
Good. Yeah, I'm one
So
of the few people who has still not seen it. I do want to. It just doesn't feel necessary to me right now.
yeah, I think it's out on streaming like this week. So
Oh, okay. Yeah, I'll just wait.
fun time. It's very much like it's too like polished, if that makes
Sure.
sense.
No, I get it.
It's like yes, every single frame of this movie was like signed off on.
I get that. Yeah,
Yeah, but yeah,
that's the next MCU is the Nintendoverse.
It really is, man. I really think like, especially with what we've seen with the success of the Mario movie. I think Nintendo just at their investors thing, where we're getting into more movies. They haven't confirmed anything. Like Donkey Kong is all but confirmed to get a movie, but even like Mortal Kombat is getting a sequel. Sonic is getting a third movie, and those Sonic movies are like surprisingly good. Yeah, the video game movies, Last of Us, like the next wave is video game adaptations because they know how to listen to people now. It's like, oh, so
Yeah,
we should just do it this way? Okay.
it's so crazy to me that that is like the next frontier. It's like very successful now too. Gran
Yeah.
Turismo is getting a goddamn movie.
Dude, that trailer looked sweet.
It kind of does. Like, I don't think I'm gonna watch that movie, but it looks like a competent movie.
Yeah. Orlando Bloom's in that thing? What's the last thing
Oh
he did?
yeah, that's a good point.
I don't know, man. I think that's probably going to be a good Dolby cinema experience.
True. Yeah. The sound in that movie. You're gonna be sitting in your chair and it's gonna be feel like you're moving.
Yeah. I do think it's very funny, though, that for that trailer, like Sony PlayStation is using PlayStation Productions to make a movie where David Harbour as the coach is like, these gamers are lazy as shit. Like they can't do
Yeah.
anything. Like I'm like, oh, PlayStation's approving that. Okay,
Yeah, that is really funny.
but yeah, that's the future. We'll see how the MCU can adapt to that. Maybe they adapt Marvel's and Spider-Man from Insomniac. Who knows?
That would be
But
something.
yeah, but I mean, outside of the MCU, we got Spider-Verse coming up, right? That's next month also.
Ooh, yeah, that I think tickets are on sale for that, actually.
Yeah, I gotta grab some. I will definitely be seeing that one. We'll be talking about it on the show. But any final thoughts on Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3, Jack?
Just that it was fantastic. Really loved the movie. I was expecting to be emotionally invested but not emotionally devastated in a very positive way. I don't think I cried as hard at a movie in the theaters since Endgame, quite honestly. So it was successful in that regard. It's really successful as a trilogy in the MCU, which is really rare. This feels like kind of the only trilogy in the MCU, to be honest. Like
Yeah,
Iron Man 1 through 3 doesn't feel like a trilogy
it does
in the way
not,
that
no.
this does. So yeah, just a really great cap to this. If this was the last MCU movie, it would be perfect. So yeah.
I agree. And I opened with that sentiment. I will say once again, like, obviously, if something I'm excited for, I'll make an effort to see it in theaters. But, like, there's just too much at this point where it's like I can't be over the moon excited about everything from Marvel. But when moving forward, splitting ways with James Gunn, if Kevin Feige can take anything from this specific movie into meetings with future creatives, I'd say trust them. If they're committed to it, allow them to go for whatever run of movies you want to give a character. and take notes on stakes for the Guardians trilogy. I think the Guardians trilogy has some of the best stakes in the MCU that are outside of the spectacle movies, because obviously it feels like with Avengers you want larger villain, larger scale threats. And with Guardians, yes, they blow up a planet full of civilians in this movie. But the real stakes are the personal character relationships. And I think that is what got me to care so much with this series, and an not easy way, but a surefire way to make me care about new characters in the MCU, new threats, new problems moving forward. So,
Well said.
well, I think that will wrap up our spoiler review of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. Like I said, we got Spider-Verse coming up next month. Maybe later this month we get some Spider-Man 2 news. I'll try. I think the issue of that comic is free. So if we want to read that to get started on the Spider-Man 2 hype train, I'm down
Sure.
to do that.
Yeah.
But until then, Jack, where can the agents of Excelsior find you?
Sure, you can follow me on Twitter at FascinatedJack. What about you?
You can find me on Twitter and TikTok at Shun2D2. You can find the show on youtube.com/joyclicks every weekend, premiering in the video version. If you want the audio version of the podcast, you can find it on your favorite podcast service like Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Play, anywhere you listen to podcasts. Unfortunately, I don't think it is available on Zunes. I don't think Zunes exist anymore.
Rest in peace.
Truly. Speaking of Kojima and MP3 players, anytime he posts that like expensive Sony Walkman, I'm like, man, I need a Walkman. They look so cool. But that's it for us this week. We'll be back. I should be back next week with some Spider-Man 2 talk and the latest and greatest in Marvel, superhero, etc. But until then, Excelsior.
Excelsior.